Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Gairdner conversation around COVID vaccines. I'm Janet Rossant, and I'm President and Scientific Director of the Gairdner Foundation. And I am here with Mark Lievonen, who is co-chair of Canada's COVID-19 Task Force and former president of Sanofi Pasteur Limited, the Canadian vaccine division of Sanofi. He's also on the board of the Gairdner Foundation, so I've managed to capture him between important meetings for a conversation on the current state of the development of COVID vaccines. And who better to give us straight answers? So, Mark, this week, a lot of excitement because of the announcement from Pfizer about the interim results from their phase 3 trials of their vaccine candidate. Made a lot of press attention, the markets went on a tear, and what they reported was only interim results, right? 90%, but with 90% efficiency of preventing infection. It's definitely a ray of hope, and everybody's obviously excited. But can you give us the real story? What does this mean, and what are the sort of steps that we still have to undergo for this particular vaccine to actually make it through all the hurdles to be approved for use?
Well, first of all, Janet, it's great to be with you today. Thank you for this. Indeed, the news about the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine is very interesting, great news, very encouraging, great to see. But of course, there is more to do to get a vaccine like that licensed and launched in Canada. It has to continue to go through the clinical trial results, the submission of the regulatory dossier, the review of that, the approval, and then once it's licensed, it can then be launched into the Canadian market.
So and how long would that take? In the normal scene of things, and also in the current environment, I guess.
Well, there has been an interim order granted by the Minister of Health, so they are able to do a rolling submission, which is terrific. And we also know that the companies have been manufacturing the vaccines as they go along. So once they have finished the clinical trial, and there's been discussions about 2 months follow-up after that, as I said, the rolling submission is being reviewed. So hopefully shortly thereafter, the vaccine, if all goes well, could be licensed and then launched. And in my terms, optimistically, I hope that we'll have some of these vaccines available in, say, Q1, Q2 of next year, and we can begin to immunize people and actually get the vaccines into the arms of people.
Into the arms, I like that. we all want to hug that vaccine. Okay, so this particular vaccine is a rather special vaccine, right? This is an RNA vaccine, and my understanding is that we've never approved a vaccine like this before. This is totally new technology. Can you tell us a bit more about how it works and what the pros and cons are?
Yes, that is indeed correct. So RNA vaccines and therapeutics for things like treating cancer are very exciting. There's never been a product approved for a therapeutic or vaccine use. It basically, RNA, the instructions are given to the body, to the cells, to manufacture the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So that's how they work. Very exciting in terms of the science that was able to get this vaccine candidate to market as quickly as possible. But as you said, and I'll reinforce, there's never been such a product manufactured and commercialized yet. There's also some challenges with it, such as the storage conditions, which are minus 70 degrees Celsius. So that's something else we have to deal with. So very exciting. These are the forefront of the vaccines. They're leading the way right now, but it will be the first time such a product has ever been licensed, launched, and introduced to the public.
So in this case, our own cells are taking the RNA, and our cells are making the protein, and then
yes,
our immune cells come in and respond to it. Is that how it works?
Yes, so they're given the instructions to manufacture the antigen, the spike protein, and then the cells in the body react to that. So it's a different way of delivery. All of the vaccines that we've looked at so far are all about the spike protein on the SARS-CoV-2 virus, but they get there slightly different ways.
I think it's really a fascinating new technology. So let's keep our fingers crossed on that one. But the other, so we talked about how it works, and the interim results look very promising. We haven't had the full results of the phase 3 trial, but let's assume. We also heard, I think yesterday from Moderna, who have a similar vaccine going through the process, that their interim results look good too, they said. Now, as a scientist, I am always wary of science being by press release as opposed to science by peer review. So do you have any comment on this, releasing these data early? Everybody wants to know, but are we going ahead of the time? And what about the safety issues of these vaccines? What do we know?
So you're not alone with that. My colleagues on the COVID-19 vaccine task force have similar thoughts, not used to science being released by press release. That's one of the reasons I said this is great news. It's very encouraging, but there's more to come. There will continue to be safety and efficacy data, as I believe 44,000 people are in this clinical trial. But we are all anxious, as I'm sure Health Canada and other groups are, to actually see the data and to review it and be able to go through the review process with that. So very encouraging. Moderna may very well come up with something shortly. And of course, there's other vaccine candidates using different platforms that are also in the works and may follow a similar pattern down the road.
Mm-hmm. You know, talking about other vaccines that are coming down the road, there are, as you said, there's a number of them. Are there any Canadian ones that are moving forward, ending towards the front?
Yeah, so the COVID-19 vaccine task force, our role was to advise the government of Canada about securing safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines for Canadians. We have now provided advice to the government of Canada on 7 vaccines, and the government of Canada has announced that they have agreements with these 7 companies. They're across 3 different platform technologies. Actually 4, because there's the RNA, the viral vector, the protein subunit, and the virus-like particle, which is a vaccine introduced by Medicago. Medicago is the lone Canadian company in this race at this point in time, and that agreement was signed just recently, and so that's very encouraging as well. So we have 7 candidate vaccines across these 3 or 4 different platforms that the government of Canada has entered into agreements with, and so that gives us a pretty good field to look at.
Great, that's fantastic. So we talked a bit about approval. So, you know, there are many layers to getting this into people's arms, as you say. So the approval, clearly, I think the Pfizer vaccine is going to end up at the FDA before it ends up with Health Canada. Is there a good agreement? Do we have to see Health Canada go through a whole separate review process, or will there be coordination between the FDA and Health Canada in terms of assessing these? I mean, I'm talking about speed here.
Right. Well, I think Health Canada will go through its own review, its own independent process, but it will also adopt the position of speed, the theme of speed. One of the things at the vaccine task force that we talked about early on was, in this kind of crisis situation, one has to make battlefield type decisions and act on incomplete information. That's fine for the vaccine task force to do, and we've refined our recommendations along the way. Health Canada, while they have a sense of urgency and do have the interim order in place, they will be following their own particular protocols. They won't be taking shortcuts. We are all very confident that science will rule the day in the end. So these vaccines could very well be approved earlier than one would have expected, but they will have gone through the safety review, the efficacy review, dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's before they are licensed and approved in Canada.
Yeah, and I think everybody would agree that that's really important. And Health Canada has a strong reputation in doing exactly that, not making rash decisions. So that is very important. And that's a message that we have to get out to the public, that it may seem like, you know, here we are, the results look great. Why can't we just do it now? The vaccine is being made. Let's just get it out there. And I think you're right. There's a lot of careful review that has to take place for sure.
Yes, indeed. And there are issues, as you know, around vaccine hesitancy.
Yes.
And so on the one hand, I'm struck by the fact that people are concerned about COVID-19, as they very much should be. It's not a disease one wants to get. And on the other hand, they may have some hesitancy in getting a vaccine. As I say, it's not just about vaccines, it's about getting people immunized. So I think it is important to communicate, and for scientists to communicate the process that's involved, that Health Canada is undertaking. And by the time these vaccines are introduced, they'll have gone through a rigorous review, even if it's been done in a shorter period of time than one might otherwise have expected. You know, it was back in May, I gave a presentation on vaccines and what might happen with COVID. And I talked about timeframes like 10 to 15 years for a typical vaccine, 4 to 5, fastest ever for Ebola and mumps. Some infectious diseases, we've never had one. And here we were talking about 12 to 18 months for a COVID-19 vaccine. And I must say at that time, I heard it, I said, all of these scenarios are likely. The way the world has collaborated, companies, industry, government, doing things in parallel, it's unheard of. And so we may very well get vaccines in 18 months that are safe and effective versus a standard that was typically 10 to 15 years, with the shortest being 4 to 5. It really is quite remarkable.
I know it. It's just incredible. And I will always think, Mark, you must particularly know about this. I mean, you ran a vaccine center and you know how hard it is and how slow it is to get these things out. And then you've got the manufacture and the distribution. So I think the speed is fantastic. Everybody's worked together. Now let's talk a little bit about the distribution. I must say, I'm a little worried about how we're going to distribute this vaccine across Canada. So I read today that how Pfizer is going to be sending out their vaccines. They have a special little dry ice containers that will contain the vaccine doses and that they will ship around. But then when they get to places, they're still going to have to be kept on dry ice or used up very quickly. And so that's going to be a constraint. And then just as usual, the sort of geography of Canada and our dispersed systems, our provincial federal systems, we've seen what's going on with the distribution of the flu vaccine in Ontario at the moment, which is not very smooth running. Do you have any concerns about actually getting this into people's arms and how we're going to do that?
Well, it's a great question. I'm not sure if I'd use the word concern. Certainly there are challenges and issues. So just like we've never had an RNA vaccine before, we haven't been distributing them at minus 70 Celsius before either. So it really is a challenge. But this is a moment, just like we thought we had to speed up the development of vaccines. Now a lot of bright minds and people are looking at how do we get them distributed. At the end of the day, when we actually get through the distribution channel into people, fortunately, we've had experience with H1N1 vaccines before and the flu vaccines and other things. So there are mechanisms in place. But at the same time, this becomes a joint, federal, provincial, territorial responsibility, working with private sector distribution companies as well, getting storage conditions that we haven't dealt with. There's no doubt it's a challenge. It's also, we need to continue that theme, I believe, of battlefield type decisions, sense of urgency. We can never, at any stage in this process, if we just go back to the same old mechanisms that we've used, it will not work. So lots of attention on this. The Public Health Agency of Canada has a lead role. They're working with the government departments. They're working with our vaccine task force and other task forces, getting together people who are experts in the field to provide advice. And so a lot of smart minds and people are working on this. So definitely a challenge, particularly with these vaccines, but people are working on it.
I'm sure they are. I notice that in the States, they're talking about getting the army to help the distribution, which sounds a little strange, but in some ways makes some sense, I guess. So
yeah, it's an interesting point of differentiation, perhaps. Because the Army is playing such a dominant role down there. They certainly have a different military capability and ability to do that than we do. It's not traditionally our approach in Canada to get the military involved in these kind of distribution things, though I think they're clearly available if the need is there. And there are certain segments or territories. You talked about how our country is wide ranging in terms of geography and population. So certainly they may be available to help get it to certain remote areas. So all of these things will come into play. One other point I would emphasize is we did our work, and as we provided advice to the government of Canada, the collaboration and spirit of cooperation with our group and with the various departmental agencies and ministries in the government has been remarkable. I mean, the cooperation and collaboration has been everywhere. It was one thing for our group to provide advice on the vaccines, and it was another for the government procurement group to be able to actually reach agreements with companies. And I just think that's gone remarkably well.
Yes, indeed, because obviously procurement was incredibly important. It was a time when people felt, the Americans are going to keep it all, every country. So, vaccine nationalism came into play. And of course, there has to be some form of vaccine nationalism. Every country wants to make sure they have vaccines for their population. But I think the government and particularly the procurement people did a really great job in procuring for Canada what we need. But also, and that was one of the other points I wanted to just discuss, was this whole issue of making the vaccine available globally. And so there obviously is a lot of concern about making sure that we don't just keep all the vaccines in North America and in Europe, but that it gets distributed around the world. And so Canada has joined into this COVAX initiative and put money into that to ensure that, some money goes for us to get vaccines, but some money specifically goes to support vaccine distribution in the developing world. Do you think they've done enough, and how important is that?
Well, certainly it's very important. Another one of our sayings is, if this disease exists anywhere, it exists everywhere. So it's very important that we provide access to vaccines for Canadians, but that we're also part of the international effort. And that can very well happen through two ways. The COVAX facility, as you mentioned, so $440 million has been contributed by the Canadian government towards that. $220 million to buy vaccines for other countries around the world, and $220 million is available to buy vaccines for Canada to augment the efforts we have already underway. So we're pursuing that. The other thing is, if you do the math and you total all of our vaccine agreements and you total all the doses that we could acquire, it would be over 300 million. Now, the Canadian population is about 38 million. They may very well be two-dose regimes. We don't know for sure, but let's assume they are. And, so that means up to 76 million doses. That's assuming everybody got the vaccine, so it could be somewhat less than that. So, excuse me, if all these vaccines got licensed, which is not necessarily the case, we will have extra doses. If some of them get licensed, we still may have extra doses. And so there is a reason to believe that the government can donate those, any additional doses, extra doses internationally as well, to help out those countries. Again, I think it's part of the spirit of collaboration and cooperation and the global effort. I can tell you that Joanne Langley, my fellow co-chair, and myself have been in touch with our similar colleagues, similar vaccine task forces with the UK, Australia, New Zealand, France, German discussions. So there's a lot of spirit of cooperation within that. And certainly that's something Canada, I'm very proud of what Canada's done in this area. Your question was, is it enough? I think every country needs to step forward as best as possible to contribute. There's a couple that are notably absent, and maybe that'll change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's great. I think it's so important. And yes, we have to solve this around the world. Any little leftover bits of virus is going to come back to bite us for sure. But what we're talking about now is vaccines, and we're all getting excited. And by the middle of next year, we're going to have vaccines. We're now in the middle in Canada of a big spike in COVID cases and predictions of worse to come. So I think it's clear that we still have to continue, and there will be continued restrictions on people's behaviors as we go forward for some considerable time to come. So the public health measures are not going to go away, right?
I think that's correct. It's very concerning where we are with our cases and the numbers growing. And the conversation you and I are having now might have been different even a week or two ago. So these things change constantly, unfortunately, really in a direction that none of us would like. There's probably fatigue out there. And, simple things. People say, what do we do? What do we need to do? We need to wash our hands often. We need to social distance. We need to wear masks in public places, or when we can't social distance, we need to be very conscious of these things and carry out these behaviors, because we can see how the resurgence occurs, and we're in a concerning place right now.
Yeah, no question. We should all try and stay home as much as we can.
Yes.
And it's going to be a real challenge over the next few months, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I think the message is not to let go now, but keep with the public health measures, because there will be an end to this. So let me just finish by asking you, What do you think? Are you optimistic about a post-COVID future?
I am. So you know me well enough to know I'm an optimistic, positive guy by nature. I sometimes can't help it, but I look at where we're going. As I said, I look at the talk I gave in May, the one I might have given in June or July, and where we are now. It's dramatically different. To see these vaccines coming along, and I think we really do need them to help make a dent. But optimistically, I think to have vaccines available and beginning in Q1 and Q2. And when I say available, I don't mean just licensed. I mean available to be administered to people. So I think some people, the high priority groups, will start to get vaccines. I could say by the time the snow melts, Q1, Q2. My background in industry makes me want to under promise and over deliver. So I don't like to be ahead of where they might be, but I think that's very well could be the case. And I'm very hopeful that next summer will be a whole lot better than this summer.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us today, Mark. And I hope that everybody watching has enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.